over, or you're going to stay on, or you're going to turn over the?
I'm probably not going to stay on, so I probably will just turn it over to you. You should already have the ability to share. I set that up, and then before I sign off, I'll turn you over to host, and that way when you actually, will it keep recording on my computer if you're the host? Do you know?
It should. It did last. It sounds like it did last time, right? But
oh no,
we just
I think I kept myself as host. I had to actually stop the meeting.
Okay, you can leave yourself as host. That's fine. As long as you turn on that the participants can share screen.
That's already done. Yeah.
Okay, so that's really all I'm going to need.
So, all right. So again, like last week, I don't have a ton of announcements for you. Obviously, it's the middle of the summer, so I don't have much. And remember that we have what's his name, Andrew Moss. Going to be presenting on Sunday, August 23rd at 1. And he's a United Kingdom sports and action photographer. And he's going to be talking about basically what he does for a job and how he does his work. And the way he sold it to me was that he's also going to go through his processing as well. So it's going to be how he shoots, what he shoots, examples of it all, and how he processes right through the whole process. So it should be a good presentation to see. And that, again, that's Sunday, August 23rd at 1 p.m. All that information is on the Facebook group. I've made Dennis hello, there's my daughter. She's just come home from a walk. I've made Dennis a honorary member of the group, the members only group. So if you guys have questions, you can reach him directly through there. So if you don't get a question tonight or something pops up, definitely feel free to reach out to Dennis directly.
Yeah.
And he's going to post some stuff. Just like he does with the NHBPA page, he posts stuff all the time, sort of before and afters and stuff. So he's going to do the same thing for our little club. And if you have questions on how he did something, I'm sure he'll be happy to answer them.
Good.
So that's pretty much all I have for you at this point. So the next actual, if we start up with what we're calling normal meetings at this point. Not that there's anything normal about these, but those will restart in September. Hopefully, it's supposed to be a speaker meeting, but I haven't booked anybody yet. So we'll see. It may just end up being where we have all this extra stuff happening this summer. Maybe September is just a nice, we'll just get together and do a photo critique and just sort of reconnect a bit. So keep an eye out for that. We still have a little bit of time. And in the meantime, if you guys have questions for me about the direction of the club, or if you have questions for the club or recommendations, reach out to me, reach out to Tanya, whatever. The leadership group is going to meet pretty soon again for the first time in a while, just to sort of touch base again and find out where we're going with the club, and hopefully start planning some outings or something. Now that things have calmed down up here in the Northeast, we should be able to get out with some face masks and actually take some photos. So I guess that's all I have for tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Dennis. And
Jared had a question.
That's about all I got.
John, one more thing. Don't we have to, for people that have pictures over at the gallery?
Oh, yes. If you submitted to Riverstones, and Pat, you're in, right? Jared, me, Chris Morris. Pickup is on Friday. No specific time. Just stop in at some point during the day. They'll have a sheet that you can just sign that you picked up. Yeah, just pick up on Friday. Stop in at any point when they're open. Their hours are listed right on their Facebook page. Just look up Riverstones. Chris won't be there, but her employee Tom will be there. And he knows you're coming, so no big deal. And then if for some reason you can't do that, just reach out to me and we'll make other arrangements. I'll swing in and pick up. Whoever doesn't pick up, I'll pick up everybody's stuff if necessary. That doesn't mean don't go.
All right.
Well, not joking, but go and pick up yourself. So anyways, I'm gonna turn it over to Dennis now and, pick up some good information, ask questions, and that's all I got.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sean. Appreciate it. And welcome back, everybody. So let me bring this up and share my screen here. My desktop. So can everybody see my PowerPoint?
Yep. Yes.
All right, great. So we had our Photoshop 101 last time, so we don't need to go over here. So just as a quick review here, you know, hopefully you saw, or I got the point across of what Photoshop's strengths are, right? Because, well, let me ask a question. Do I make the assumption that most people are at least using and working with Lightroom also? Is that a fair assumption? Because I think as we talk, Lightroom has come a far way, but it's when we want to get into pixel editing on a photograph, Photoshop is where all of the capabilities are. So we got the layers, we got masks, and in the examples we're going to go over tonight, if we go over a couple, you'll see how strong that is. And it gives us, Photoshop gives us a tremendous number of tools. So we can use selection tools, we can blend different layers together. We can adjust highlights, shadows, we can remove objects, we can clean up sections, we can stamp one area into another. It's fascinating what we can do in Photoshop that we don't quite have as elegant a solution in Lightroom. So Photoshop, and it's really is a critical tool for photographers. And I'm of the mindset and the genre that I go out and I capture images to bring back and create a photo. I think we talked about this last time, but you know, this crowd of people here that don't believe that manipulation is real photography, okay, but I call my business DR Fine Art because I go off, capture different pictures, put them together, and create the picture that I had in mind when I saw it and had in mind of what I wanted to create. So from my perspective, it's a critical tool for photographers. And as we reviewed last time, there's a whole group of people that uses graphic designers, web designers. So there's certain tools that I never use in Photoshop, and there's a group of tools that I use all of the time. And you know, people who are starting up with it, I always give the advice to be very patient because it's a very, very complex tool. But as you get more proficient in it, it also has the capabilities to do whatever you want. So, you know, I think Lightroom is very, very powerful, but it has limits. But I think Photoshop, I haven't quite found something yet that I wasn't able in my mind's eye to create and do within Photoshop. So the questions is what did you learn last week? And if you went off and tried anything and got stuck on something, as I said before, when I signed up with Sean and Tanya to do this sessions, I said, look, here's my take on it. It's really complex. Let's have a 101 class in 1 week, lay out some things for the attendees to work on, and dollar to donuts, when you go off and do that, something I had said either didn't stick or you got stuck on or you didn't understand or you weren't even to the level to ask the questions that you needed to ask. So in a few minutes, we should sit down, and when I told them we would do 2 sessions, the first one was to go through as much as we could as a Photoshop 101, and I got to tell you, I struggled with this because I didn't want to bring in some of the more complex things you can do in Photoshop, because I also, when I'm teaching a Photoshop course, don't ever want to overwhelm the students, because sometimes that will just turn people off to it. I think you got to grow with Photoshop. And so it'd be really good in a couple seconds here to have a discussion on what did you learn, what did you get stuck on, what do we need to clarify, and what you think we missed in doing our 101 class. So we will have that discussion in a second here. So I would really like to answer and address all the questions and issues that you may or may not have. Now, maybe you guys just said, no, got it, Dennis, I slam dunked it, I'm a Photoshop pro. And if we don't have to do any of that, Reed was kind enough to send me off the picture of here that he captured this barn. I don't know where it was, Reed, but maybe you can tell us about it when I bring it up. And then the comet here, and he wanted to put the comet behind the barn. And this is where Photoshop's strengths come into play, because we can do this on layers, we can do it with selections. And you're going to see a couple other things, hopefully, Reed, that are going to make your picture much more powerful when we're done with it. And Jared, you had asked about blend modes, right? Blend modes are really, really powerful. Now, with the power comes the complexity, and I'll show you about that. But Photoshop has really done some great, Adobe has done some great stuff over the last 2 releases working with blend modes, because I was semi-tempted to show you what blend modes are, but none of us, including me, would understand, because blend modes are all mathematical formulas. But I'll show you the blend modes. And Jared, I don't know if you had a specific usage case in mind with the blend modes, but it'll be interesting when we get into it. I'd love to hear your feedback, because I'll show you how I use blend modes, right? I use a lot of my blend modes with textures, when I overlay textures, and the ones I have today happen to be florals. And when you have a picture that is not that interesting or doesn't have a great background, you can really change the whole look of the picture with textures and blend modes. So I don't know, Jared, if you wanted to just speak up on that. That's where I'm going to kind of show it tonight, but I don't know when you said blend modes, I think you had something in mind about what you would like to learn or do with blend modes.
So the thing was, I was kind of saying, if you want to mention blend modes for everybody, because I do use different blend modes and some of their advantages, kind of just go over what they can do for you.
All right, good. And like I said, we're going to walk through that, because Adobe's made it an order of magnitude easier now for us to select which blend mode. Like I said, the majority of them I will use with textures, except whenever I ask anybody and they're really not familiar with, and I don't know if you guys are either, but the 50% gray layer, right? So this is a technique that I'll have to remember to try to incorporate in one of my pictures a little later. But it's basically a layer that we put on, fill it with 50% gray, and we use it to dodge and burn. And you can do some very interesting things with that. So that is a blend mode that I use all the time. So we're going to go through the Q&A section. Anything anybody's stuck on, any other general questions, let's handle those. We're going to do Reed's picture here, the barn and the comet. Then we're going to talk about some blend modes if we have some extra time. Was asked here to do some of my typical edits. And for everybody's sake, which I got from very strong feedback from you guys last week, I oiled my chair. So you won't hear me squeak anymore, at least not tonight. So let me do this. So what about it, guys? Any questions on the specific things we went over last week? Anything you tried, anything you got stuck on? Pat, were you going to ask?
Yeah, in the past, if I use the selection tool and I get the marching ants,
Yep.
It seems like it should be simple to end the circle, but I can't. And then I end up, every time I move the mouse, I just never end.
Okay, great. Because when we do Reed's picture tonight, obviously we're going to use selection mode, right, to select the sky. Now, when you use it, are you using what tool are you using to select with? Are you using a polygonal, or are you using the quick select tool? Are you using the magic wand?
I think I've tried different ones.
Okay.
It might be the magic wand.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. It was a while back that I did it. I just know I stopped doing it because I could never figure it out, and it was so simple. Okay,
because selections are really, really important and strong. So we'll go over that. And just to show the complexity of the selections, Reed gave me a real challenge case here, right? He gave me his picture of the barn. You saw it had a bunch of trees, and some of the skylight was coming into the back of the trees. So when I selected the sky, we also had to select into the trees. So I'm going to show you some refined selection modes there that'll be pretty helpful for you. But when we're in that and I'm selecting, if I'm not covering exactly what you're stuck on, make sure you ask up again, because typically if you're working with the selection tool, I would work with the quick select tool. The magic wand was the first selection tool that Adobe came out with in Photoshop, and it's passe. It's not a good tool. It doesn't work. They came out with the quick selection tool, and when I show it to you, you'll see how your life will be much easier. So we'll go over that with selections.
Yeah, Dennis, I tried to use the marquee approach that you showed us last week, and I had some problems with that. My first thought was just take to do the marquee, capture the comet, and move it into that photo rather than replace the entire sky. I totally failed and had to go back and do like an embed the entire other picture and then just kind of black out the sky and take in the whole sky. So I would like to go over that. The approach that you used last week that you showed us the marquee looked really slick. I just couldn't get it to work.
Yeah. Okay. We will talk about that. Now, just so you know, when I did it, I did select the entire sky that the comet was on, right? And I was thinking about that the other day. If we have some extra time here, we can go off and test that. We should be able to go into your comet sky and do a select by color range and try to capture just the comet. We'll have to mask out the rest because a lot of white stars is going to capture. Put it up on a sort of a transparency layer and then put it in. But my first shot at that, I'll show you, I did replace the entire sky with the comet, but we lost some of that. That was an awfully nice sky you had behind it. So if we have extra time, we'll play with that.
Yeah, Gordon would have noticed the difference in the stars, but I don't think anybody else here is going to care or even notice. So I don't think it matters.
We have a couple guys in our group in Bedford, Mass. that are astrophotographers. You can't ever get an unknown sky by them. So right, but for the average person, we're good with it. What else, guys?
One other thing I'd like to do is know how to change a specific color in a photo.
Okay.
That's one of the things I've tried in Lightroom but can't do, you know, like highlight a specific color and change it to another color.
Yep. Okay, good. Jared, were you gonna say something? No? Okay. Anybody else? If, again, this is your time, so if there's anything specific you want to get out of this.
Come on, Ray, I know you got questions.
Okay, yes, and please, as we're going through, keep it interactive. That is the way that I always like it. So I guess we are going to start with, Reed's pictures here. And let me bring up Lightroom. Let me share my screen.
I do have one question.
Sure, Pat.
When you had your screen up last time, we see a panel of the people on the right side. Is there any way to make the screen larger and take the people out?
Let me try that. You know, I will. All right. How about if I keep it down to 1? Does that work? Okay. Are you seeing my screen right now in Lightroom?
Yes.
Okay. I usually like to, and so you see I got my screen, my Lightroom screen up right now, and can you see that I have one picture of you up here, Pat?
I can't read it that well, so.
No, but do you see, I don't know if I'm the only one seeing it. You see yourself in the middle here?
No.
Do you see yourself now?
No, just on the right, on the right side.
Individual views are selectable by the users, by the end users and what they see. I don't think you can project that, but maybe you can.
Which is good, but I also like to see at least 1 to a couple people when I'm working, right? It's really difficult when you're talking into a camera in the dark and you say, does that work? And you don't see, at least with this way here, I can see people nodding their heads, which is helpful to a presenter. So So Pat, is this good? Can you see my whole screen right now?
I see the whole screen. It's small, but I guess it's my computer. So just
It's
go
your,
with, go
yeah.
with what you have right now. That's good.
Okay, because I am on, let me see here, one other thing. Let me move you guys out of the way. I was going to see if I could go somehow into full screen mode here.
Hey, Pat, if you go up to and hover over where the people's pictures are, you'll see that there's a couple of different displays. There's almost like, it looks like a checkerboard 3x3, then there's one on top of the other, a single one, and then a minimize. If you select one of those, it may make the video screens for people smaller so it doesn't interfere with your screen as much.
You just lost your audio, Pat.
Okay, I have it muted. I'm just using the space bar.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a view options. Is that what you're talking about, Jared?
Few options. There's thumbnails, there's grid, there's active speaker video, and then there's hide thumbnail video. So those will change up how many people you see, and it may take up less of your screen.
Okay, I'll look at it in a minute, but that's fine. Thanks.
All right. So we're in Lightroom right now, and I have Reed's two pictures here. I have the picture of his barn, and I have the picture of the comet that he captured. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select the barn. I'm going to hold down the command or control key on a PC, and I'm going to select both those layers, both those photos. I'm going to left click, and usually I will go up and edit in Photoshop. In this case, I'm going to come all the way down and tell it to open as layers in Photoshop. So it's going to place both of those layers, one on top of the other, in Photoshop for me. Can people see my Photoshop screen now?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So these are the two pictures that Reed sent over. And if you notice, just to make sure it was challenging, he sent them over in different sizes, but that's okay. We'll work with that. I'll forgive you for that, Reed. So what I did first is I'm going to get them both the same size via the free transform tool. But before that, if you notice, if you hit Command R or you go up here, View, and you come down and you show rulers, right? So I turned on my rulers, and you can see there is a horizontal ruler at the top and is a vertical ruler on the side. If I left mouse click inside that left ruler, it allows me to pull out a guideline. And I'm just going to bring that down, set it on my picture as a reference. I'm going to grab a second one here, and I'm going to put it on this corner. So we see we have the typical keystone in effect. Whenever we get our lens off of 0 degrees, as soon as we go up, it'll collapse in or collapse out. But we are keystoned here. So I am going to take this layer, and I'm going to do an edit, free transform, okay? And I'm going to hold the command key. If I don't hold down any keys and I drag this corner handle, it's going to increase this size equally, both the horizontal and the vertical. But if I hold down the command key, command or control key while I'm doing this, I can independently move / stretch any of the corners. So I'm going to take this top right-hand corner and I'm going to pull it out till I'm kind of looking at that front corner of the barn where my reference line is close to, and I'm going to straighten that out. I'm going to hold down the command or control key again, and I'm going to come over to the top left-hand corner here, and I'm going to work at getting that rear corner of the barn, and I'm looking at it in reference to this blue reference line straight. So looks pretty good. I'm then going to hold down the command key and bring this. No, I don't want to do that. I'm going to take the center one here because my sky behind me is the same size, but I can use to adjust this a little bit. And as I stretch out one side, and I'm going to take this. So I'm going to try to make this a little straighter than it was, okay? Let me, more hide video panel, all right. All right, I'm trying to remember which one it was. It showed me last week, higher feature meet. All right, because last time I was doing this, the controls for Zoom were in the way. So we saw now that I took this and I was able to stretch this out on a pixel level right now to straighten up the bind and hopefully read the bind the way it was before wasn't your artistic look that you wanted. But if, you know, as myself, I'm just looking at straightening it out. So I will hit the check mark here to commit that in place. Okay. Now what I want to do is I want to select this sky on this top picture so I can blend this sky into it. So I don't need that on, but what I'm going to do, and Pat, this is the tool I'm talking about up here, the quick selection tool compared to the magic wand. The magic wand is really not that great of a tool. So the quick selection tool is very helpful, and they've been refining this for years. And you're going to see that we have some other quick selection refinements that we can do with this that are going to be really helpful. We can make selections with the marquee tool here. I can select with the marquee. I can just set down a group of points. And when I come back, Pat, with any of these open selection tools, when I bring the far end off of my beginning point, you see in the bottom right-hand corner of the lasso, the polygonal lasso tool, it shows a little circle, meaning that if I click down on that, it closed my selection. Does that?
Okay. What did you click down with? Right,
so
click.
let me use my mouse. So I'm going to left mouse click, left mouse click, left mouse click, left mouse click, and I can move to anywhere. I'm going to left mouse click. And when I bring it up, it shows me the little circle. Let me bring it out here so it's a little bit. Shows me the little circle, and I'm just going to do one more left mouse click. And once I have the marching ants, means my selection is closed and in place. Okay?
Okay.
So obviously that's not the selection we're going to use tonight. So if you, anytime you do if I had a selection and I want to get rid of it, here's two things you can do with selections that are helpful for us. If I want to keep the selection in place, but the marching ants are bothering me, I can do a Command H. All right, that was a Zoom command, and I got rid of you guys. All right. I can deselect or hide these, or if you do a select, deselect, that gets rid of my selection. But we're not going to, so that was just an example there. What we are going to use right now is the quick selection tool, right? If you hover over here, like I said, whenever you have a tool, if it has a little triangle in the corner, it offers you more than one selection. And the magic wand was the tool that I said before. It's kind of, it doesn't work as good as the quick selection. So I'm going to take my quick selection. I'm going to make with my brush here a little bit bigger, and by moving the right bracket key. Now I'm just going to left click mouse down and I'm going to drag. And I just dragged until it made the selection that it thought I wanted to select, which it did, right? So it's selecting the sky here. And I'm going to view, I'm going to shut off the extras here. So let me just move these two lines out of our way now that we're done with them. So it made the selection that I wanted to, and it does that via contrast lines, and it does a relatively good job, but not a perfect job, because if we look over here, it did a selection amongst most of the trees. It missed this tree top, and it's also missed all of these spots that are holes in the trees that the present sky is in, and they're not selected here. And this is where it usually gets very challenging, is around this type of thing. It missed a couple of the bushes here and probably can use to be cleaned up here, right? So, but it was a great first start. Now, if we have the quick selection tool selected, Adobe added this functionality in I think two revs back, select and mask. So it allows us now to refine our selection. So I'm going to open up the select and mask, and this was left open because of the way that I had set it up. So if we first bring this in, it shows up right now and gives me the choice right up here on the view options of looking at this a little bit differently. And I come down, most of the times I'm going to use the overlay just because it's red, and when we're working on it, it's a little easier to work with. So I'm going to zoom in right over here, and you notice, right, so my challenges are this tree isn't selected and this entire area is selected. And if I put the other sky, because it's a different color, it's going to show up as this present color, and it's just going to be obvious, and this is not going to be clean. So this was my quick selection tool, and the second tool down on the top here is my quick selection refinement tool. And what this does, I'm going to set this brush to a size that I want to work with. It tells Photoshop, okay, you did a decent job, but you didn't do a great job, and here's the area I want you to focus on. And again, it's going to focus on most of this from a contrast perspective. So I'm just going to come over and paint over the areas that I want it to think about. Now, if you notice there, it just did a great job of selecting those extra branches. Can everybody see that? Right? So that was huge. Years gone by, I would have tried my best just to remove those branches. And then these holes down here that are holes in the branches that is showing the sky behind, I don't know what I would have done with that. I'm just going to come over here now and paint. I'm just got my left mouse down and I'm clicking on those areas, and it now has selected all of these holes in the tree where that sky should be showing through. And the more I just paint, again, giving it an area to a much smaller and refined area to work on. If you guys have tried this in the past without this tool, I can't emphasize how spectacular this is. In trees like this with the sky coming through, and on portraits where you're going to take a model and put him or her in a different place and their hair is out, this also works spectacular. So what we just accomplished there in less than a minute, I used to spend an hour on. And so I'm going to come up here, I'm going to paint on this area. And again, as I paint on an area, I'm just telling it to pay a little bit more This whole area here under these trees needs to be opened up. I'm just telling it to pay a little bit more attention on the selection due to contrasts of different edges, but it's getting me the refined selection that I need and want, right? If I was trying to get this one spot over here out in the past, it just wasn't going to happen. And I'm going to do the tops of these trees here. And again, as you come down, it's really done a great job on the refinement of its selection. Did a great job here on the selection, did a really nice job on the corner of the barn. Obviously, I'm going to just paint over these trees right here. Did a great job there. I'm going to come in and open up these holes in the sky over here. I'm going to collect the tops of those brushes over there, tops of that brush there. I'm going to open up these holes here, and there's a couple more here. So as I look at this, this selection, and Reed did just because he had to, but the other challenge with this is this was a relatively low-res file that Reed sent over just so we could transfer it back and forth in Lightroom, in email, I'm sorry. And this still has done with a low-res file. It would have been a little easier looking and working on it in a higher res file, but I got to tell you, this is a spectacular job of what the selection tool just did. So I'm going to do a Command-0 to bring this back out. I'm going to zoom out a little because I always like looking at the edges, and this selection is fabulous. So I can go back to my marching ants. Now, whenever you're working, when you can't do it here, so we got the selection, and now all I need to do is come back and hit OK, and it's going to take me out of the select and mask tool and bring me back onto the layer I was working on. So I cannot emphasize enough right now that we've gone through and we've captured and created this complex selection, the one thing you want to do for yourself, come up here to select and come down here and save selection, and just give it a name, sky. And now that selection is saved, right? Did everybody get that? Up here on the command, I'm going to go to select. I'm going to come down to the bottom here, do a save selection, and I'm going to save this selection because I can't tell you how many times before I have fat-fingered something, lost my selection, and had to restart the whole thing. Now this one, with the tools we have today, that select and mask tool made this an order of magnitude easier than it used to be. But when I would do this by hand, I would get that and I would lose this selection. I would go nuts. So anyway, we have our sky selected right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down, hold down my Alt or Option key on a Mac, Alt on a PC. And I'm going to come down here at the bottom to in the lower right-hand corner in Photoshop. And the third one in that people will affectionately call this the front-loading washer machine, this square with a circle inside, is the mask tool. I'm holding down the Alt key and I'm going to hit the mask tool. And it basically right here, it created a mask now on this layer. Black will block whatever is on that layer and the white shows through, right? And right now I'm showing the mask. If I hold down Alt and I click on the mask itself, I can see the mask. And even if I needed to go in and refine this, I could do it right here. So now I have a mask here that if I turn on my lower layer, that comes through as my sky. So what I want to do now is select the lower layer, and I'm going to do an edit free transform on my sky. And what I'm going to do here, before I do that, what I want to do, I'm going to zoom out a little bit so I can work with this. So I can come up here and do an edit transform, but I think on your cheat sheet I left you with last week, Command T is what I always use. Once you get rolling in Photoshop too, the shortcut keys are spectacular. So two things that I need to do is I need to get my comet up here where I want it. And this is the light pollution coming from the initial thing here. So I am going to just take this on a free transform, stretch this out. I'm going to move it into place. I'm going to hold down my command key and move. Right now I'm looking right here at my horizon line because we could leave, again, this is your artistic, you could leave part of that because I don't know, Reed, if this was a town in the background and you want to show that there was light pollution coming from the town, you know, this is an artistic choice, but I'm just saying right now, I can hold down the command key and move the light pollution out. I can move this up. I can stretch that down. So I can continue to stretch, move, and manipulate this to the position and the size that I want. Once I've got this in place, I'm going to check mark this. I'm going to do a Command 0. And that was where we ended. I should have taken a snapshot, but this was what I ended up with yours, Reed. Mm-hmm. Thoughts, questions, feedback?
Looks
piece of cake? What's that?
Looks great to me.
Yeah, you know, this is the type of work that I like, right? I have an entire sky collection, both daytime and night times. I went out to Yosemite 4 or 5 years ago in November. Nobody was in the park. I had the entire park. They had, and then we had an Indian summer, and all of the waterfalls that usually stop started running again. I had the run of the entire place myself. I had all of the gorgeous scenes that there were there with 5 days of blank blue skies, right? So when I got back, I may have put some other skies in just to make it look like a picture that was worth looking at. So that's the type of stuff that I think is worthwhile, and I personally like to do.
Yeah, I think I mentioned to you the whole reason I wanted to do this is basically frustration. I had planned this shot. The actual the comet was actually behind the barn, but it never came enough above the horizon to put it above the barn. So I'm sitting out there. So I walked around the barn, took the shot, and then came back. And I thought, well, I can put these two together at some point when I learn how to do it. So
you know, that was perfect, Reed. You know, it's I would always capture it and save it. And for whatever reason, my first trip over to Italy was in 2006, and it was just some tremendous scenes as I was there. And I started to read about this possibility of doing HDR in the future and this high dynamic range, how you could merge pictures together. So while I was over there, I would take a shot by hand, and I was on 1/3 stops on my camera. I was in aperture priority, but I would change my shutter speed. So I would go up 3 clicks and take another shot, 1 exposure value up. I would go up 3 more clicks, take 1 more exposure value up, go down 6, go down 3 more, go down 3 more. I would capture 5 shots of the scene, 1 exposure value apart. I loaded those into my catalog, and they sat there. That was 2006. They sat there almost till 5 years later in 2011 when they started to come out with HDR programs. And then I went in and processed all of them 6 years later and got the shots that I wanted. And I saw that I couldn't capture in a single shot due to the high dynamic range that I saw. You know, the challenges we have is when we go to shoot a scene like this, the cameras capture 5 to 10 EV stops. A human eye sees 20 plus, so we see everything that our capture can't capture. But nowadays, and I'll show you if we get to one of my examples here, I almost do multiple captures of everything I shoot today, because as far as I'm concerned, the light, the scene, that moment, that time is going to be there then, and then it's always gone. So anyway, anybody else? Questions, comments, thoughts on this? Make sense? Easy? Piece of cake? All right.
As we discussed earlier, what about taking the comet from the other shot and pasting it into the other sky? You showed us ways of having the color automatically blend.
Yeah.
So
let's see. So
I don't want to hog all the time. If other people have got things, please come forward with them.
yeah. So let's I'm just looking at the time here. So let's save that, because that's going to be relatively complex. So, you know, what you should try, and it sounds like you did, right, is I was going to use the marquee tool, but I really don't want that. So I want to come up here and select that. And then I would first try to come here, and I would select via the color range. And I would select that color right there, and I would increase this and see this is, and I see now it's got everything. So if I hold down the Alt, I'm going to try to, so can you see the red area that I'm getting here? I'm trying to, the problem is the white and the blue here are not very far apart in the color range. So this is, I'd have to work on that a little later, Reed. That would be a real, because the sky and that is not really, see this, your whole tail here is blue in color. So that would really, I'd have to think about that, how to refine that out of there. Now,
yeah, I don't want to take up everyone else's time. We can do that another time or something.
You know, we could reduce the color out of it, but we're going to still have a white background that shows up in there. I don't know. I'd have to think about that one a little bit more. So anybody? All right. Any other questions on this? All right. So let's close this one. Yeah, I'll save that off. And this came out pretty much to your trial and error on that, right, Reed?
Yes.
All right. So let's talk about blend modes. Okay. So, Jared, if I'm not hitting the arena that you want to hit, let me know. But if I have a picture like this, right, this is one I captured at the Botanical Gardens the other day. So just, and again, instead of starting you off here, I just figured, you know, if we're talking about how I do some of my edits, I had a 90 millimeter macro on this, which I got a relatively sharp composition on this, but I was probably 6 to 7 feet away from this because I was standing on a bridge over the lagoon. This was planted, this is an Asian garden in the Naples Botanical Gardens. So I couldn't get up as close as I would have liked to have done. So this was the capture that I got, which I said was okay. Let me reset this. Okay, so this is what I captured. okay? Now, whenever I come in, and we'll try to go through this quick, whenever I come in to do my Lightroom processing before I'm going to go into Photoshop, I always start with lens correction because it understands to remove chromatic aberration, which is not big in this picture, but if I had a landscape with trees and your lens wasn't the highest quality, you're going to get chromatic aberration, right? And chromatic aberration, for those of you that aren't familiar with, you're going to get purplish and green lines over the branches and leaves in the corner. And then the profile correction is great because if you can't notice, there is some vignetting in the corner here, and it's also a little barrel distortion. And once you put the profile correction on, Adobe has a complete library of cameras and lenses that it knows what to do with. So I will always do that first. I'll come down here. I know that my camera and lens combination, I can go up into the 80% on the sharpening here, maintaining the sharpness without getting any halos, right? When you overdo your sharpness, you're going to get halos. So that's, you always want to sharpen as sharp as you can, but not too much. I'll then come up into my basic panel, and in this case, because I was 7 to 8 feet away, I know that I wanted to use this more of, it was just the flower that was my interest, not everything else here. In fact, I'm just going to bring it down here because I'm going to zoom it in a little closer in a second, but I'm going to do my first pass zoom here. I always start with my highlights, bring those down. This one's not bad. The shadows, I will look at my white balance, and I got to tell you, the auto white balance in Lightroom has come really far, and it's correct the majority of the time. If not, I usually get something white or gray that I'll set the white balance off of. I'll bring down my highlights. I will bring up my shadows if I need to be. Again, this was pretty, with the sun hitting this, the tonal values were pretty close. I'll hold down the Alt or Option key. I'll left click on the white slider, and I will move this over until I start to see any of the color coming through and back off of that. If you see any of the color coming through, you've overexposed or you've blown out your whites, which you never want to do, right? One of the cardinal rules of photography, never blow out your highlights, because even white is represented by an RGB value. If you blow it out, if I move my whites up, so I can see this is going to be my hot spot, right? This middle pod here. If I move my whites up, I've lost all color. I've lost everything that's blown out. So if I was to print this, the print paper is white, but RGB, I mean, white is actually put down with RGB values. In this case, since there's no color here, it wouldn't print ink over this spot. And if you held the paper up on an angle and looked at it in the light, they call this ink deprivation. You'll see there's actually no ink down on that piece of paper, the photo paper. So you never want to blow out your whites, one of the cardinal rules. So again, I'm holding my Alt key down. I'm going to bring my whites, and I'm also looking at my histogram here, right? Because the top right-hand corner, I will turn my warnings on. So if I go up in my whites, there's 3 ways I can see if I've blown it out. Anything that goes up the side on the right-hand side of the histogram, if now that I have my warnings on, it'll show a color, and I start to see red coming through here, telling me this spot is blown out. Or if I hold down the Alt key and move it, it gives me a black representation. I'll go to where it's blown out, and if I go further, you'll see all of the reds because I have my warning up here. Or I can see on my histogram up the right-hand side, I've blown out my highlights. Nothing should go up that right-hand side. Or I can use the Alt key in conjunction with the white slider. And what I'll do is I'll go up till I see it blow out and come right back. And what I'm doing is I'm stretching out my tonal range. I'll take my blacks and do the same thing, total white. And when I come over to blacks, I'll leave some blacks because that's how I'll get some of my contrast. A pure black still has an RGB value. I will now come here and I want to refine this a little bit better. And I'm going to refine it to right here. And I'm going to deal with this and this in Photoshop because I can manage pixels up there. Now, I may want to put a little bit more clarity on there, right? Clarity slider and vibrance are two sliders that came in about 3 revs ago, and everybody was going crazy with them. Everybody was calling them the crack sliders, right? You gotta be careful not to do them too much, right? And clarity is mid-tone contrast, but really does some nice things which people think it's a sharpening tool. And I don't know what this line here is, but I'm going to clean that up in Photoshop. And if you notice here, I had a B in there, which I'm going to take out in Photoshop too. So I'll give it a little clarity, maybe a little texture. And I'm not worried too much about the background because the background's going to get blended with the texture. Okay. So then I will do a left mouse click and I'm going to go edit in Adobe Photoshop 2020. Okay, so that was my pre-processing that I do in Lightroom, and now I'm going to bring this up into Photoshop and work on it. All right, let me. All right, so we now have this here in Photoshop, and let's do, so the first thing, whenever I want to do some pixel manipulation, or I would say 90% of the time you need to do cleanup. I will always, and again, I think we talked about this in the first session, you can do things in Photoshop right now to make this a destructive edit. I can double click on this, let me go back one and show you. So if you see right here, this is my background layer, right? This is meant to be treated as my negative. I shouldn't be able to damage my negative. And if you notice here, there's a padlock on the right-hand side, which will stop me from doing any adjustments on this layer. But if I want, I can double click on that padlock and change this now to layer 0, and I can do manipulations on this layer. And once they're done, they're done. I can't really revert out of them with the exception of the history file, which I always keep open here. I can go back one step. But once I leave Photoshop, that history file goes away. This is a temporary history file. So I always come down and add a blank layer on top of anything I want to manipulate. I'll double click on here and I change this just so I know this is, I'm going to call this fixes. I'm going to come up here to my spot healing brush, which is done great. And if we notice, this is a content aware tool. And I'm just going to start to do cleanup here. And the content aware tools do a spectacular job of removing things out and maintaining the tonal values that are around it. So it really does a good job. So Pat, this is to your, so what I want to do is I want to remove this B because I don't think he adds anything to the, if he was up here and he was in full, I'd leave him. Right now, I think he's just a distraction. So if I come in here right now and I try to fix this, and I'm going to take my tool and go over the B, the problem I've had is it's not smart enough to know I don't want it to grab the center of this water lily, and it didn't do a great job here. So I'm going to grab my selection tool. In this case, I'm going to grab the polygonal lasso tool. And I'm going to left mouse click there, left mouse click, 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 left mouse click. And Pat, when I come over, you see how it shows the circle at the bottom of my lasso tool. Can you see that? It's very small. There's the circle, not the circle. So anyway, what that does is it's showing me that I can close when I close that selection. So I didn't do a great job on this edge. I think that's going to cause, and the point I'm trying to make to you guys right now. So if I want my fixes to just stay within an area, if I select the area, it should only select values within that area. Now it selected my the center, I don't know what you want to call that, the stamen here. I can go over it and try, because I still had, if we look at my selection, I still got too much yellow in there. So I'm going to Command D. I'm going to come over here. Now, if I want to get very precise, I'm going to use the pen tool, which again is one of my selection tools. And I'm just going to stay up here, and I'm just left mouse clicking down on a spot here. Now, this not a bad curve, but the thing the pen tool has the strength of, when I left mouse click, I'm not going to let go of the left mouse click. I'm going to left mouse click here, and I'm going to drag, and I can curve that line. I'm going to leave that there. I'm going to come up here. I'm going to select this, and I'm going to curve to make sure my selection goes along that curved line. Now I can just go freehand, freehand, freehand. So now this should have given me a much better selection. Now, this is one of the more complex tools. So I just showed you how to make curved selections, but the problem is this is what's called a path tool. And I don't want to confuse you, but a path tool, all I have to do is left mouse click in the middle of this, because what I just did was I drew a path. I'm going to left mouse click, and I'm going to make a selection from this path. And I'm going to put a feather on it of 2 pixels. Okay, so now if we see, I think my selection is much better down there. So now if I take my spot healing brush and I make it smaller, it should only be selecting pixels and colors from within the bounds that I told it to work. And it's on that leaf. So it gave me as close to a perfect selection as I'm going to get. Questions? This is really kind of important. Say now if I do a command, just in case we've got to come back from any other questions on this, I'm just going to save my selection. I can do a Command D to deselect it. I just got rid of my selection. Now, I can also, if I was over here, I can use the marquee tool and make a selection here. And the only thing that's doing is it's keeping all of my selections and work it's going to do inside the box. Because even as you notice here, I'm trying to select over here. It only lets me select in the box. So I can do qualified fixes with this. This is extremely handy. And again, it doesn't have to be a marquee. It could be my polygonal lasso tool, right? I can draw out an area here as sloppy as I want to be, close the selection, and it'll work just within this area. I could, I'm going to do a Command D to deselect that. I could come over here with the quick selection tool, make it much smaller, and select them there. And now I can work just within this area. So I can use any of my selection areas, and everything I do within this area is going to maintain. So say I wanted the bottom of this stem to look as dark as the top or vice versa. I can take my stamp tool now, and even though my stamp tool is this big, when I hold down the Alt Option key, I'm selecting the data where I left mouse click right here. It's in my brush and I can paint it up top here. So, but I can keep everything within this selection. Okay, so selections, that one, all right, that one did not work because I was on my blank layer. I have to be down on my other layer, and for it to get the data to, now if I use the stamp tool, select data here, I can paint it up in there. So that I don't want to work on. Okay, so that is how I was able to select in this area here and clean this up. This one's not bad. I can take my spot healing brush. I'm going to size here. I'm going to do a little, and I can just come over here and paint over this. And the quick selection tool is smart enough to know. And again, in a couple areas, I don't like what it did. You just redo it. It's, and whenever I'm doing a lot of florals and I'm going to print them 20 by 30 or larger, I'll make sure that all of these spots, all of the small brown spots on the this specimen was in really good shape, but you're always going to get areas that, and this water drop, I can either leave it or I can remove it if it's bothering me, since it was a single one. But I will always go through like this and clean up my flowers so they look close to perfect. All right, so I know we've been going around the bush here. This is to get us to the point of using something in blend modes. Okay, so I'm going to go back. And I want to take this, and I just think this background is dull. I want some texture in this. And so I'm going to go back here in my library, and I'm going to take, these are textures, and textures you can get anywhere. If you go to a website, let me go down to where my textures are. If you go to a website called cgtextures.com, the gentleman who owns that will allow you to download like 25 textures per day for free. And if you need the 26th, you go back the next day. These were just selections. If you go to www.cg, as in Charlie Girl, textures.com, you can download. There's bricks, there's trees, there's cement, there's some, and I just had grabbed a bunch of textures that I used that I thought I was going to use. And you know, there's neat things you can do with textures is I can take the 3D-ness of that texture when you have some that are very have a 3D texture and blend that into the flower, right? This is how people on photographs put signage that looks like it was painted into a brick wall, right? They can form it into the wall. But so those are textures. Flypaper Textures is another company. You can get different textures. Joel Olives is another website. If you go look at him, he sells them, but he'll give you a free 10-pack. Sarah Gardner, who uses some really nice textures on her portraiture work. She wrote a book whose name escapes me right now. She will give you some free textures also. They're all over. And you can go and take pictures of anything and create textures. I bought a texture pack from a young lady, an American living in Paris, who used to be a painter, and now she does her work in photography, and she creates textures, and she will photograph them and sell them as PNG files. So very helpful. So with that in place, let's go back to where we were. So I'm going to take this texture here and bring this up, and I'm going to use this texture in conjunction with our shot. So all I'm going to do is I'll do edit in Photoshop. I'm going to edit the original. I'm going to let this open up. Now I have this open and I have my flower open. Let me get rid of these controls again. And if I look at this image size, right, this image is 3.9 by 5.5 inches, 300 pixels per inch, right? If I look at my size of my texture, this texture is 11 inches by 17 inches by 300 DPI. So they're different sizes. So there's a couple of ways I can do this. Again, I'm going to go the long route right now because I'm going to show you the fast route in a few minutes. So what you want to do is you want to move one layer on top of another. You can drag it over, but typically what I use, I'll come up to edit. I will come up to edit, select, see, this is the problem I have, that I don't always know where everything is. Command A will get you select all. Oh, I'm sorry, select up here. So I did a select all, which selected, you see the marching ants are now over the entire thing. I'm gonna do an edit, copy. I'm going to go over to my other file. I'm at the top layer here, and I'm going to do an edit, paste. Okay, so that pasted that layer on top of the present layer present layers that I had open. Now, if I look, just bring down the opacity of that layer. Oh, that pasted, it was, oops, all right. So it pasted it in there, but if I take a look and if I do a Command T and do a Command 0, you can see my texture. This is the size of my picture. This is the size of my texture. And in this texture, it's not overly important, but because it doesn't have edging on it, but if I have any textures that have an edge, I want it to be exact or as close to the size of the picture I'm working on. So I just did a free transform and put that on the same size. Okay, so we get all the way here just for this. I'm not putting you to sleep, Jared, right?
I'm right here.
All right, so this is where we come in with blend modes. And if you notice right here, the word normal is where all your blend modes are, okay? Now, just for a second, I want to go back to my PowerPoint. Can everybody see my PowerPoint slides? So, select this. All right, so again, as I was going to tell you, blend modes, complex, interesting subset that photographers use. What I just showed you there, I came up with, there was 20-ish. And each blend mode is a mathematical formula. And the thing, I'm going to show it to you, but then I'm going to tell you, don't worry about it because we don't care about that anymore because Adobe helped us out with a visual mode on that now. So I'm just going to take one of the blend modes. I just pulled down that menu. There was about 20. And if you look at, we had A, it was the active layer. B was that texture layer I just put on top of it. So if I get down and select color burn as a blend mode, this equals 1 minus the textured layer divided by the original layer. Everybody get that? Makes no sense to me either, right? So, but don't worry about that. So these were the layers these are all the blend modes. And we have a group, and they're broken into groups. These are the ones that darken. These are the ones that lighten. These are the ones that work with contrast. And these are the ones that do comparative modes, which you will, these are the only ones, will cover 99% of what photographers do. Multiply, lighten, screen, overlay, and soft light, and hard light is in there too. These are the only ones that we are going to work with, okay? So let me get out of this and go back to my Lightroom. All right, is everyone want to go back to Photoshop? Okay, so what Adobe did after people were trying to work with the blend modes, but I didn't remember that if I'm going to come down here and select color, what was that one we had? Color dodge, that's 1 minus 1, it doesn't matter. What they did do now is if you open up the blend modes and you just hover over every blend mode, it shows you what the results are going to be. So multiply is one that a lot of photographers use. Color burn, not so much. Linear, darker. Lighten is one that a lot of photographers use. Screen mode is one. Color dodge, not so much. Linear. Overlay is one that gets used a lot. Soft light and hard light. Now, as I look at these, I am floating over each one to see what I want to use. Overlay is interesting. Soft light, not quite as much as I want. And hard light is interesting, but right now it's too hard, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to select hard light. And if we zoom in, you can see that it is overlaying or blending that into the picture below. But it's too much. But blend modes, you always are going to come over here and deal with them. You notice here's my blend. I'm on that layer. Here's the blend mode. It's in hard light, and the opacity is right here. I'm going to move the opacity down, and I'm looking at the overall thing because I'm looking how it's interacting now more with my background than just the flower, because I'm going to remove it partially off of the flower with a mask. And this is all artistically driven, right? When you get these layers on, you're blending them in, the opacity, how much you mask out, this is all done to your artistic taste. If I bring my opacity down to 17%, I'm barely seeing any of it on the background here. And again, the background's boring. I want to bring a texture into the background. And didn't want to do that. And this is how I can blend it in. So I am looking at my background, and I will take a lot of my florals when I shoot them. I shoot a series of florals that are focus stacked, and sometimes I'll take 40 different layers of the photo to put them together to get something in complete focus from front to back. But the background is shot on a black paperless background, so I add a texture in to bring some life back to it. So I'm semi-happy with this. I'm going to put a mask on this, and this is, if you notice, my mask here is white, so everything is showing through. I'm going to take the brush tool. I have black as my foreground color, which is the color that is in the brush. I'm going to set my opacity up here to 15%, and I'm just going to brush out, and I'll bring this in a little closer. I'm just going to brush out some of that texture layer over this water lily to my artistic taste. I don't want it completely covered by the texture layer. And again, my brush strokes are at 15%. So I can go over once, I can take some of it out, take out a little bit more. And if you see, the texture is now doing a lot to, this is what I've masked out on that. And I have a gray mask as opposed to a black mask. I masked some of it out of the flower, but I still have it 100% on the background. Okay. And I'm getting to where I want it to be. I'm going to come back into here and I'm going to grab another texture. I'm going to do Command E to edit that in Photoshop. I'm going to bring that in. Now, just as a hint, you saw that we selected all, we copied the texture layer, we went over into the other picture, we pasted the layer in. It was, let me get these controls out of the way. It was just a pain, it was a lot of steps. So shortcut wise, I now can bring through, and I'm gonna open up image size. Okay, this is kind of an advanced complex tool, but if you're gonna do anything with textures, just look at this at the tape later or write this down, because this is extremely helpful, right? I brought another texture in, usually a different size than my picture. This one is 4,200 pixels. It really doesn't matter. It's 13 by 20 inches. My other picture, I think we saw, was 6 by 8 or whatever. Doesn't matter. When I open up image size, if I come over here into a window, and it's down below here, all the windows I have open. If I click on the window I have open, it just resized this to my destination. Okay, I don't know if you got that, but it was, instead of going in there and Command T and stretching it down and overlay, and then now, so this is now the same size as my original picture. And if I do, instead of select all, edit, copy, edit, paste, I can do a Command A for select all. I can do a Command C for copy. I can do a Command W to close document because I don't need it anymore. And I don't want to save it because my textures are large textures back in Lightroom. And I bought them because they were large textures so I could work them. So I just resized it. I don't want to save it resized because I could be throwing pixels away. So I do a Command W to close it, don't save, and now I'm over here at my top layer and I do a Command V to paste it in. Okay, I know that was a lot. I brought it in, resized it, did a Command A, Command C, Command W, Command V, and now I have it right on top. So this one here, if I take it into blend modes, I know my my soft light and hard light have been working pretty good for me. And again, maybe I like having a bluish tone on here. Maybe not. Okay, this is going to work us into another one. Read when we talked about changing color. So I've got this one in soft light. I'm going to move. No, I'll leave the opacity up right now so we can see it. But I want, so this layer is on here, and if I hold down the Alt key, now it's also on the flower. I don't want it as much on the flower. If I hold down the Alt key, come over here to my mask and drag it up, I can replicate my mask on this layer. So I just took that partially off of this. Now, say I want to change the color of that mask or the edging around here. So Reed, I may come down here and I don't know, I can't tell you why Adobe does this, but if I come up here, here are all my adjustment layers right up here in this tab, right? We open this up as the photographer's workspace, right? Remember, window, workspace, in photography. I made some minor tweaks, so mine is Dennis, but pretty much the same. The adjustment layers are up here, but they also have the adjustment layers down here with an addition of a couple extras. So don't ask me why, but there's a solid color adjustment layer. I'm going to put a solid color adjustment layer on top of that texture. But right now, it is affecting the entire stack. But I can take this layer. If I hold down the Alt key and hover between the two layers, it will clip it into the layer below. Meaning that whatever I do on this layer, the only thing it affects is the layer below. Okay, and Reed, can you see that? If I want to change the color of this layer, the solid color layer, I can take, if I just double click on the solid color layer, it comes up with, this is my representation of my color wheel. Right now I'm in the blues. I got white to black in the blues, and I can go light blue, darker blue, or I can take these sliders here, I can move them up into the reds, I can move them over to the pinks, I can come down and change something more into the yellows, I can have it light, I can have it a darker or heavier yellow. So this is one way, Reed, that you can go about making changes in colors of different things.
Okay.
Okay. This is one of the ways that you can do it. So if I wanted to do that, but I didn't want to, this was just an example. I really don't want to change the color of this layer. I'm going to come down here. I got it in soft light. I'm happy with that. And I may lessen this one. So this is primarily one of the ways that I use blending modes. And Jared, again, I'm going to show you one other way. Remind me when we work on one of my other ones here, I'm going to show you the gray layer, which is important. So did I answer your question, Jared, what to do with blend modes?
So yeah, no, that's a different perspective because I've used blend modes before for star trails because it's easier sometimes to get the sky, do a lighten, and you can move the star trails over. So I've used it.
Yeah.
Anything other than that.
Yeah, I've seen that done quite a bit. This is how I will use these with textures on florals. And again, I'm going to show you a blend mode in a minute that I'm using the 50% gray layer that you're going to find out is really, really useful in a lot of your photographs when you're touching them up.
I love the texture one. That's good.
Say that again?
I like the texture. That's really nice.
Good. And again, there's thousands of textures, and whatever texture you bring up really changes. So I'm going to just quickly take this in. So when you see, okay, so here's my quick mode, right? I'm going to come up here. I'm going to go to image size. I'm going to come down to the window of my picture. I'm going to hit OK. I just resized it. I'm going to do a Command A, Command C, Command W. Don't save it here, and do a Command V. So I just brought my layer into this picture. And I can, oops, I'm using it as a clip. I got to unclip it. So you can take layers like this, and as I go down to the different modes, it really does some fascinating things. And maybe I like what it's doing from those colors on there. I'm going to put a mask back on that, on the flower, but maybe I like some of the yellows a little, making this a little bit more purple, but I can blend in different textures with different colors that eventually change the look of my picture. Now, I can also say, well, geez, I really like what this has done from a texture perspective, but I don't like the color. Well, it's easy. I'm just going to add up here in my adjustment layers, I'm going to add a black and white adjustment layer, which right now is affecting the entire stack, but I'm going to clip it onto this texture layer. So what this did was it removed the color but left me the texture. So, or I can shut this off and bring the color back. So artistically, you can bend, twist, and do anything to these with blend modes. Extremely powerful, complex, a little scary, but they're on layers. You can't damage anything, so give them a shot. Questions on this, guys? All right, let me get out of some of these. All right, so I was asked, I think by you, Ray, if memory serves, to go in and do a typical edit that I would do. So we were up in the White Mountains and trying to remember the name of this covered bridge. I got a good friend that's an outstanding guide. Anyway, we shot this, and this is when I shoot. What time were we there?
It looks like Albany Bridge.
It is. It's Albany Bridge. Thank you. So we were here at 11:30 p.m. Not the best time of the day to be shooting. Doesn't matter. We left the house at 5:30 in the morning, drove up to the White Mountains. This was like our third stop. We were doing a huge loop, and we were back home by 6 o'clock. So we were here, and as they say, make hay while the sun shines, right? So it was a higher contrast environment than I really wanted to capture. And because if you notice up here, I captured it at f8, ISO 100, and I was at 1/60th of a second, but extremely dark underneath the bridge, and my sky was very bright, right? So I get a tonal value wider than what a single photo can capture, right? So what I do is I bracket 2 stops apart, 3 shots. So this is 2 shots exposure value under. So if you notice, in aperture priority, I'm remaining at f8 because I don't want to change my depth of field. The next shot is 1/40th of a second, because if I go 1/60th, 1/80th, 1/40th, I'm 2 stops down. And this is capturing all of the detail underneath the bridge here that my initial single shot was pretty dark. Now, I might be able to lighten that by pulling out of the shadows, but when you pull out of dark areas in a photograph, you're going to get noise, right? That's just the way it is. So this second shot got me the detail under my bridge that I want. And then the third shot, I'm 2 stops over, so at least I got some of the clouds and the blue in the sky. Okay. Now, I don't know if you guys have worked with HDR in Lightroom. It's extremely easy. You grab the 3 shots. I'm not going to do it now because it takes time to crunch. You take the 3 shots, you select them, you do a left click, you come up here, you do photo merge. It does HDR, bang, it's done. And it supplies you with this shot. Well, let me show you my original shot, right? So if I go into develop model and I look at my original shot, have that 1 shot selected. If I come up here to my exposure, I have the capabilities of going 5 stops north. I can manipulate this shot by 5 stops of exposure value, and I can do 5 shots south or down on my exposure value. That is the extent that I can manipulate. Now that I have a shot that I merged from 3 different shots, and that has the data in it that I need, I could now take my exposure and go 10 stops up and 10 stops down, okay? So far more flexible, right? So if we want to know how Dennis edits stuff, I'm always taking, in this case, enough data that I can come back and work with, because in that single shot, as I showed you, too dark under the bridge, too light in the sky. But I captured the data, came back in 3 shots, combined it together, and have an HDR shot. So again, as my sort of quick, I'm going to go into lens correction, make sure I turn on remove chromatic aberration, enable that. In detail, I'm going to set that to 89. I'm going to come up into, oops, let me reset this. I'm going to come up into, boom, boom, boom. Going to bring this up to 89. I'm just trying to preserve some time here. I'm going to come up into the basics. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my highlights and bring them down so I can get the detail back out of my sky. Major assumption here, right? Everybody's shooting in RAW. Because if these were JPEG shots, I could not manipulate this anywhere near I can do right now with RAW files, right? We have a saying in our other club, friends don't let friends shoot JPEG, right? So always capture RAW, right? So anyway, the highlights I can pull down. I can capture this back out. I can take my shadows, and I'm looking under the bridge right here. I can bring my shadows up and get that detail back out of under the bridge here. I'm going to do a auto on the white balance. That's a little warmer than I like it, so I'm going to come back to here. Luckily enough, I got some gray surfaces here, right? If you always want to know if your color balance is correct. Now over here, I have a gray surface. So white surfaces, gray surfaces should be equal in RGB values. If I take my pointer and just hover it over a gray spot, now I need to move. You need to look right below my histogram on the top right-hand corner here, okay? If I hover over a gray spot, leave my cursor there, my histogram right now says red is 48, green is 47, blue is 47. That means I basically don't have a color cast because this gray area that should be neutral is neutral. When RGB is equal, they're neutral. Okay, just a quick helpful hint. And if I'm doing anything inside of a house, whenever I leave the real estate shoot, I always make a mental note that all of the molding in the house was white, because now I can come back and set my color off of that. If you don't want to look at that, even though this gray is, let me throw the color balance off. Say for whatever reason, when I captured this, it was very warm, very yellow, right? This right here is the white balance, auto white balance tool, this eyedropper, right? Can you see what I'm circling over here? Pick that up and you put it on a spot that should be equal and click once, and it will set the values of RGB even for that spot, bringing me back to a neutral color, right? So you want to make sure your white balance is correct. So I may give this a little texture. I may do a little on the clarity. Dehaze is a really nice thing where it'll bring in a little contrast right now. 2 sliders I rarely, if ever, use. I never use the contrast slider because I will always set my contrast with my white and black sliders. If you use the contrast slide, it's moving the white and black in equal amounts. And contrast, I don't ever want to set my contrast. I want to set my white independent of my black, and I want to set my black independent of my white. So I never use the contrast slider. I will come down here. I'm holding down my Alt or Option key. I'm grabbing the white slider, moving it up until I see that I've blown out some of my highlights. I'm moving back to a spot here. I'm gonna grab my black, bring that down, put a little blacks. That's how I adjust my contrast, not via the contrast slider. So I have this adjusted now. It combined 3 shots to give me a single DNG, and this is still a raw file. That's what's nice about Lightroom's HDR. It creates a raw file. You're still working with a raw file, has all of the flexibility. I'm going to come over here, left click, edit it. Well, why would you go to Photoshop? Okay, there's a chair and a young lady right here that I don't want in there. There's a gentleman sitting over here watching the world go by. And okay, when I shot from the other side, there was another young lady sitting over here. She's not sitting there when I took this shot. I don't want them in there. So I'm going to now want to manipulate this from a pixel basis. I'm going to come over here to edit in Photoshop. I'm going to bring this up into Photoshop. And wait for the new one to open.
What is that message?
This one right here? That what you're asking about?
Yes.
All right, so I have preferences wise, I have Photoshop set up for my tools history long, export performance scratch. I have, let me go see if I can find workspace. All right, I got to file export performance scratch cursors. All right, I've got to go and find, I have my working space set up in here as the sRGB color space. Let me open one other thing and I'm going to show you. So when all right, I'm going to try not to confuse you. There's different color spaces, and if you understand color spaces, the lowest color space is sRGB. And if you would see that, it would be let me see if I can do something a little silly here to try to answer that. I'm going to look at this area as just an area, but if I looked at the color space that represented sRGB, it might only be this big. This would be the color gamut of it, and it would show all of the colors that are supported in sRGB. And what that means is the printers can print these colors. If you go into Adobe RGB, see, it's not going to do it. It would be a larger color space on top of that. And most of us have our cameras set to capture at Adobe RGB, because when I walk away, I want to walk away with as much data as I can. But I have Photoshop set up, and I gotta, since I set it once and forget it, I'll have to go back and find out. I have Photoshop set up for sRGB color space. So when I bring a picture in, it tells me I'm in Adobe, but do I want to change it over to sRGB? I say yes, because when I'm usually in Photoshop, I'm going to go to a print lab, and a print lab can only handle sRGB. Did that confuse you or help you?
No, you gave me the right answer I was looking for, because I have that error, not error, but a message come up all the time.
Yeah.
I didn't know why.
Yes. So it just says, you want to leave it in the space you just brought it in, or do you want to convert it to your working space? And my working space is sRGB, because I have sent prints out to labs with Adobe RGB, and even worse, ProPhoto RGB. and the colors came back off. Okay. So it just I use it as a tool to remind myself to change. It's sRGB. I'm going to save it as that, and I'm going to send it out as a JPEG in sRGB when I have it printed.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, okay, so we're here now in Photoshop. I have it, did my initial adjustments in a Lightroom. I'm going to put a blank layer on top. I'm going to zoom in here, and with my, let me get you guys, with my favorite quick selection, with my favorite spot healing tool, I'm going to make my brush, let me see if I can get it to a spot where you can see it a little larger. And I'm just going to, okay, I'm getting a little laggy here right now because I have so much stuff open. I'm going to come in here and paint over this. And I'm just going to continue to refine this. And if you weren't there, you would never know she was there. I'm going to come over here and just paint over this gentleman. And as I said, this is to me, this is insane because days gone by, I would work an hour minimally at removing those two with the stamp tool and the cut and paste tool. It was ridiculous. So I've now removed them out, and I may want to do a little bit more manipulation. So what I'm going to do is Command Shift Option E. Command Shift Option E. What that did was it took all the layers below and combined them into a single layer. Okay, because now this is sort of like taking a timestamp. I have a single layer that I can now manipulate. Again, another advanced technique. I'm going to run a filter on this. I like working with some of the Nik filters. If I run the filter directly on this layer, whatever that filter does embeds it in that layer and it's done. I can't change it. What I can do is come over here, left click on this layer and convert it to a smart object. And it is working right now. What a smart object layer does allows me to run a filter on it. And then when I'm done and I'm looking at it, I don't like it, it allows me to reopen the filter and rerun it on it. I don't know if that makes, so this is part of your non-destructive workflow, right? Because sometimes you're going to run multiple filters, and when you're done, you're sitting back, you're looking at it, and if you're going to send out something that's going to cost you pretty much a fair amount to print, I would always leave something, go in the other room, wait an hour, wait a day, come back and look at it, because if you're looking at something that's white balance is off, after a period of time, your eyes will start to adjust. So I never print on the day that I process it. I always look at it the next day because I'll see something or may see something. Anyway, I converted this to a smart object. I'm going to come up here on the filter and I'm going to run the Nik collection. And again, this was just a collection of tools that I bought, and you put them in as tools in Photoshop. You know, Photoshop and all of the digital editing we're doing right now is all mathematics based. Right, the guys who started Nik, when they first came out, and you could see the about them. You went and look. These are all PhD math majors that did these filters for photography, and they got a couple of tools in here that I just really like. This is one called the detail extractor, and when I try to do this in Photoshop, it's a little strong right now, but I cannot get the detail out of Photoshop that I can out of detail extractor. Now, that being said, Photoshop usually catches up pretty quickly on other companies when they have these types of tools. But right now, I am going to, I use detail extractor here, which I just really like. If you can see this, it's really punched out the area. It's even brought this area. I will add three filters that I use. Detail extractor. I hit add filter to layer another filter on top of this. I'll use Pro Contrast. Again, this is something that the Nik filters do, and I don't, you know, we're 5 of, so I don't want to spend too much time. Pro Contrast does things I still can't completely get in Photoshop. Someday, I'm sure we will. I'm going to add another filter that's a biggie of mine, Darken, Lighten, Center, which is a favorite. And if you take this and I'm going to pull down, I'm going to put this on the vertical, but I'm going to move my border down. I'm a big fan, as you saw in the first presentation, Ansel Adams, right? He always told us we should always frame our photographs. He was not talking about a physical frame. He was talking about dodging and burning and putting a vignette around the photo, right? You, as the creator of this photo, should control where your viewer's eyes go. And where does the viewer's eyes go? They go to lightest to darkest and sharpest to out of focus, right? This one's kind of hard, but if you notice now, this was the before, this is the after, right? So I've got a lot more detail. It's a little punchy. I would probably bring that down, but if you notice that my Darken, Lighten, Center has put more light here and have brought a little bit more of a vignette around the edging. Completely changed the lighting of the subject, and yet you should always do it in a way that somebody doesn't see. See, this one won't even go. They shouldn't see you got this black box around it. It should be done with finesse. But if you notice here, hopefully you can see the difference here as I change to, this was the picture I started with my Lightroom adjustments. This is the picture now with the Nik filters and the removal of the people in Photoshop. So again, I will go in Lightroom. I'll do all my initial, if I get a bracketed exposure, I will combine them together. Then I will process that, my shadows, my highlights, my white balance. I'll bring it into Photoshop. I'll remove and change anything that I do want or don't want there. And then I will typically do filter work, right? If this was going to be a black and white, I might use the Silver Effects black and white filter, which for the longest time in the black and white world was the premier filter for doing black and white photos. So this is where I would have ended up. Now, let me, Jared, one other thing that might be helpful in the blend mode world is I'm going to hold down my Alt or Option key and I'm going to add another blank layer. And by holding down the Alt key, it brings up the dialog box. And when I take the mode of this layer, this blank layer, out of normal into overlay, it all of a sudden gives me this option, which wasn't there in normal mode, to fill this layer with 50% gray. I'll fill that in here and I'll fill it. Now, overlay is the one blend mode I'll explain to you. It says anything that you put on this layer that's brighter than 50%, it'll blend that to the layer below. Anything that's darker than 50%, it'll blend that to the layer below. So right now it's 50% gray, so it's invisible. But if I take my brush, and I will do this all the time, this isn't the greatest example, I will take my brush and usually want to lead the viewer's eye up to your subject. What's my subject here? The bridge, right? And this brook would have been could be a good leading line, a diagonal leading line, right? When we talk about composition, this is a very powerful thing. So I'm going to take my brush, I'm going to load it with white, my foreground color here. I'm going to make it much larger. Just so you know, right, it's at 0% hardness, meaning that it's a soft brush. And I'm going to put the opacity of the brush down to 10%, around 10%, okay? I have a white brush now, so if I paint on my gray layer, I can start to lighten and darken. And again, this should be done, I'm doing it with a 10% opacity because it shouldn't look out. It shouldn't look like that, right? You want to feather it in. Let me go back to my history file and go back one. And whenever let me go back to start this again. When I brush this in, my brush opacity is 10%, brushing with white. When I brush down, I'm holding the left mouse button and I'm brushing down and I'm putting 10%. I can add another 10% and I can add another 10%. And this feathers it in much better than if I was to go with a 30%. And I'm gonna lighten my area here. I'm gonna change my foreground color to black. I'm gonna darken this in a little bit here. I'm gonna darken this tree selection in, and I'm gonna darken this side off and this one. And again, this should be done with finesse. And the object is to keep the viewer's eye here. And if some of these trees are a little too bright, I'm gonna bring them down. And I may take this layer and go with a larger brush. I may move my opacity up to 15%, and I'm going to take the soft edge of the brush and just paint around the edge here, putting a vignette in place. And again, it should be extremely finesseful. And let me show you. All right, let me zoom this back a little bit. Now, hopefully you can see how I have arranged the light on this picture. Can you see that? Is it usually when I'm doing these classes, I have to overdo it because it doesn't transmit well video-wise. But if you notice, my eyes should be going more in the brook here. I lightened up this area here. I darkened the trees down, and it brings, and I vignetted it, and it should be bringing the focus into this area. And see, it's done very lightly here, what I've done. So this 50% gray layer, you will find one of those in almost every single one of my photographs. And there was a gentleman, a photographer, who uses the term where he uses this technique that he complexifies the light. I went and looked up, and complexify actually was a word. I didn't think it was. But if you can notice here, I'm changing the lighting in my scene, right? The trees are darker, the foreground's a little darker, the brook's a little lighter, and the center of the bridge is lighter, right? So I will try to be very finesseful about leading my viewer's eye. This is how I edit, I would say 90% of the photographs that I work on.
Would you do anything with the color of the stream upstream past the bridge?
You could, right? So the other thing that I could do, let me move you guys back out of the way. Great question.
And just a question from an editing point of view. You don't have to do it. I mean, we could always go ahead and do it.
It's real quick. If I double click on my foreground chip, I'm black right now. If I move this more into the yellows, load my brush with a yellow, and I am going to pick up my brush. I'm going to put my opacity at, I'll leave it at 14%, and I can come in here and start very lightly add some yellow tones into that bridge, into that far end of the water. typically on a beach scene, I will add some more blues very lightly into the sky and add a little bit more yellows into the sand, right? Your opposite colors that make them pop. They're very good complementary opposite colors. It looks very well. So on a blank layer, if I put just a blank layer on here too, it's transparent. And if I take my brush and I'm yellow and I wanted this area here to look, can you see that coming through? Let me move my opacity up. That's the part that's tough, is that I can see it, but it doesn't, right? So if you see here, I could make this a little bit more yellow. If it comes out a little too strong, I could also then come in and change my blend modes. Lighten, overlay on this one. Soft light will do good with that, right? So I just made this area a little bit more yellow in this area. Were you talking about from a color or from a contrast perspective, Reed?
I was thinking, yeah, it just seems to me that the water upstream is a different hue than the water downstream. It looks unusual to me, but maybe it's just me.
As in brightness?
As in color, I think.
Color, yeah. So I could, and there's multiple ways to skin a cat. I can come in here now. Let me shut that off. I can add an adjustment layer. I can come up here and take my blues. Now my eye is only looking at this water, okay? I've taken a curves layer, taken the blue. If I pull up the blue, it adds blues. If I move the blues, it adds yellows. And I'm only looking at the water. My eyes are trained right here, because obviously this is making the whole picture yellow, which is not good. So I'm going to bring this over here. I'm right now on the white mask, which is showing everything I just adjusted. I'm going to do a select. I'm doing a Command I to invert my mask, right? I just filled my mask with black, so it took it out of here. I can come in here now. Now I'm going to come in with a brush that is going to be loaded with white, and I can start to paint in some of that yellow. Can you see that going in?
Yeah, absolutely. And
I can still come over here now. So I took the yellow and put it in there, but I can still come and play with, okay, my system is lagging right now. I can change. I painted the area I want the adjustment on. Oops, RGB, let's go back to the blue channel. I can still come in and change that. Say I wanted it blue, I could make it blue. So now I have an area selected with an adjustment layer that I can change and modify that area right there. If I wasn't sure what the color was, I can take this color. If I hold down the Option or Alt and click on that now put that color into my color palette, okay? When I have the eyedropper here, I can select the color. So now this right here is the color of here. So I could then paint. It's in my foreground chip. I can now come in and paint on this area with it. And I could blend that in. Now again, I'm painting on top of a yellow. We're doing things a little quick here, but that was the base color of the front river. So this looks terrible, but I could take some time and paint on a blank layer to put that the same color.
Dennis, I got one more question for you.
Sure.
I don't typically use opacity. I'll use flow instead of that to do some sort of color corrections or blending or anything like that. Is there any reason why you use opacity rather than flow?
People use both. There is a slight difference between the two. I have worked sometimes with flow, and then I've worked sometimes with flow and opacity. I have just become personally, Answer is absolutely yes. They do something very similar. The paint comes over for the brush slightly a little bit different, not overly noticeable, but I've worked with both just out of habit and comfort level. Opacity's always been my go-to. Flow does the same thing. I could set my opacity to 100%, flow to 10%, and paint in from there. But you'll find doing adjustments or the gray layer and then feathering in dodging and burning, which is basically what a gray layer ends up being. It's your dodge and burn layer, right? And there was a handful of us that started working that way because days gone by, the dodge and burn tools in Photoshop were the worst tools they had. They have since then upped them, but I'm still more comfortable. It allows me to paint the areas I want to paint.
Excellent. Thank you.
Any other questions on this? I don't want to have to keep you guys after school here. All right, let me stop sharing this. All right, where's my... All right, I gotta get back to... All right, well, I'm having trouble. It's not letting me bring, it did this last time. It froze in on me, so I couldn't stop sharing my screens. All right, do you guys see us or do you see?
Still see your screen.
But do you see, all right, you don't see the people here. Okay. It's, all right. All right, this is freezing up on me. And since,
Scroll down, so click in the Zoom thing, scroll down and see if there's anything in the middle that says share screen. Or click on the people if you see any people.
yeah, no, it's not giving it to me. All right.
My resting screen looks just like that.
All right. And I don't want to.
You're recording now. If you were not recording, would that make a difference?
No, I think it is still recording. Let me see.
Yeah, it's still recording right now.
Yeah, it should be still recording. Hey, Sean, can you, I've lost control of my share screen.
Let me send him a text. It might not be there.
Can you Sean, can you shut off the share screen under participants?
Yeah. Oh, there it is. There you go.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
This when I have Lightroom and Photoshop open, I'm using so much memory space that Zoom has been giving me some quirky things. Luckily, it only happened at the end here. So, guys, what else can I tell you? Did we?
Thank you.
Sorry, say that again, Jared. You were breaking up.
I thought you were super helpful. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Did we miss something? You know, it was tough with some of the requests. We went up to some complex things. I tried not to go too complex, just to not trying to, you know, scare anybody. But it's, as you see, it is extremely powerful. What else can I tell you?
We just need some time to digest it all.
Yes, you know, and if you set it up non-destructively in the layers, you can't break anything. And even if you wrote on the base layer, it doesn't matter because you still have the file in Lightroom. So you can't hurt yourself. So I would go and play with everything. And that was how I learned. You just try it, see what it does. If you don't understand what one of the adjustment layers does, put it on and try it. and play with it, because that's when it's going to become second nature. And
do you do a lot of grouping, like your different adjustments where you put them in groups so that you can go back to a certain group to save space on the layers, or not?
Yes, when I'm doing my black and whites, I'll have 20 different adjustment layers on there. I'm using a curves layer, and I'll darken down the whole thing, put a mask on it, and I'll darken just the section of the picture I want. And after a while, instead of scrolling, I'll grab all those. And the way you grab them is you highlight one layer, you hold down the shift key, and you grab the top layer. And if you go towards the bottom, just to the right of the mask selection is a group folder, and it puts them all into one layer. And what's nice about that is it cleans up my layers panel, makes it easier for me to see, and I can turn on and off all of those 20 layers at the same time. You know, as you're going through some of the, like these black and whites that are more complex, you're doing them. And it's always nice to shut on and off the changes to know whether you've overdid it or underdid it, you know? So I will group them quite often in there just to clean up my layers panel. So it makes it easier for me, because I hate scrolling up and down it.
Right. And then at what point do you flatten them? You know, because some people will flatten a bunch of layers, but once you flatten it, you can't go back and unflatten it, correct?
Correct. Well, yes and no. So I will do the type of photo we just did, right? I had 5-6 layers on that. I will save it as a PSD file. And now if I'm going to go to print, I will go in, select layers, flattens all down, and I'll save it out as a JPEG. And this is after I've also sized it with the crop tool. So if I want a 12 by 18, I crop it to 12 by 18 at 300 DPI, because Lightroom will actually go through bicubic algorithms and change your pixels. I never send it out to a printer and let them resize it, because they always screw it up and charge me for it, right? So I always send it out the right size. So anyway, I collapse the flatten layers, then I save as a JPEG, and once that's done, I quit Photoshop, and it comes up and asks me if I want to save, and I don't. So it doesn't rewrite over the layered Photoshop file. Did that make sense? Because I always save my layers. You know, we had this discussion at the Bedford Center of the Arts, and people said, "Oh, I saved disk space by flattening them." I says, as far as I'm concerned, disk space and memory space are free these days, right? They're so cheap. I now have a network attached server. I have 24 terabytes of storage, right? I'm not going to be filling that up anytime soon. And plus, I will look at a picture that I processed and modified and changed. And during those times, you know, a while back, HDR photography was really hot. Now, HDR photography, that very strong, punchy type of photography, is passé. So sometimes I can't remember what I did, but when I go back and open up my Photoshop file and see the layers, it tells me exactly what I did. If I was to flatten that, I would lose all of what I did. I think you can remember how you adjusted a photo, and you go 5 years later, you're a better man than I, because I can't. So to answer your question, Scott, I flatten them for printing, but I never really flatten. I always save my layers. And I save them in PSD, because you can save layered TIFFs, but I just save them in a layered Photoshop file.
Okay, that's what I do. I save both, you know, so when you want to post something, it's just a smaller file. It just seems to, I didn't know if I was doing it right or not.
Yeah, it sounds like you are, because like I said, sometimes you want to go back. You know, tonight when I did that one layer as a converted to an intelligent layer, I can go back 3 years later and open that filter back up, and maybe the detail extractor was a little too strong. I can bring it down, save it, and boom, I can reprocess that same picture later. times change, looks change, and maybe your tastes change. So I always save them so you can manipulate later. So,
Alrighty, thanks.
welcome. Other questions, guys? So helpful. So I know some of you sound like you okay, whether you're using a lot of Photoshop, but hopefully you start using a lot more. And you know, I did. Let me see here.
There just seems to be so many different things that you can do in Photoshop. Like, I get confused with levels versus curves. I like levels more than curves. I find it easier.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head. You know, when it comes to, if I tell somebody, lighten this area on a photo and darken this area, there's 15 different ways of doing it in Photoshop. Levels and curves. Some people like levels because they can just deal with their highlights, midtones, and shadow sliders, right? And they're very comfortable. It's very easy. Some people like curves because they can put 5, 6 points and adjust different areas separately. And, you know, some people will take a 50% gray layer and lighten it, just like I showed you earlier. Some people will take a curves adjustment layer, lighten everything up, put a mask on, and then just paint in the area that's lighter. So there's no single way of doing it. And every time, usually when I'm doing a class, somebody say, can't you do that with this? Absolutely, right? There's gives you many, many ways to skin a cat. So.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You.
In closing here, as Scott mentioned, now that I'm part of your Facebook page, I used to post a picture every Friday. I called it Photo Friday, F-O-T-O Friday. And I post right now, I'm posting in 4 other different clubs, 500px, Instagram, and I have a group that I post email because some of them aren't on social media. Sean, your TV's on. And so I'm going to post on yours, and usually people find it very helpful. I post the picture. I'll put in the center paragraph that says for the techies or the geeks. You know, I shot this at 1/60th of a second. I was at ISO 3200 for this reason. I shot it here. I did this. And I'll put in the before and after, and the photographers find that extremely helpful. So, and then people will post questions as responses on those Facebook. So please feel free. Ping me, send me an IM if you've got any other questions. If you've got any other questions too, my email is dennis.rainville@gmail.com. So don't hesitate to send me an email if you have some follow-up questions or anything. So, all right, I think we are good. You consider yourself graduated. All right, Sean, I think you can stop.
Reed, it looks like you're in the heavens.
Oh, I am. I'm in heaven.
He's probably going to be
Married bliss, Ray.
Yes. All right.
It's a shot, in other words, but anyway.
Yeah. All right. It's Sean's still there. He can stop the meeting.
All right. Good night, all.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Take care.
Good night, everybody.
Should be guys right. Yep.